Have you ever wondered why epic fantasy stories feel so powerful? Why battles between good and evil always pull us deeply inside? Maybe it's because these stories mirror the struggles within us. Maybe we see parts of ourselves in every heroic decision made. Epic fantasy doesn't just entertain, it challenges our moral instincts. It asks questions we rarely dare to confront in real life. What would you choose when everything hangs on your decision? Would you stand for good when evil feels tempting and easy? Would you risk everything to protect people you barely know? These questions echo through every great fantasy world ever created. Fantasy uses magic and monsters to reveal real inner battles. It hides truth behind dragons, quests, and mysterious ancient prophecies. But beneath the spectacle lies something far more meaningful. It's the constant reminder that darkness always whispers softly first. Evil never arrives shouting. It comes disguised as comfort. Goodness often demands sacrifice, struggle, and painful growth. Epic fantasy captures these truths through unforgettable sweeping journeys. We follow heroes who doubt themselves every single step forward. We witness villains shaped slowly by fear, power, and ambition. And somewhere between them lies the most human truth imaginable. Good and evil aren't always clear. They shift constantly. Heroes sometimes fail, and villains sometimes show surprising vulnerability. Fantasy worlds thrive because they reflect our internal contradictions. Every sword fight symbolizes choices we face inside ourselves. Every spell mirrors emotional conflicts we wrestle with daily. Epic fantasy magnifies these struggles until they become breathtakingly huge. Yet we feel every moment like it belongs to us personally. We root for good because deep inside, we understand its cost. We fear evil because it looks painfully familiar to us. Watching these stories unfold becomes a mirror for our hearts. Imagine a world where one decision can change history forever. Imagine carrying a burden only you can resolve completely. That's the emotional weight epic fantasy forces us to confront. It lets us explore morality without real-world consequences harming us. But the deeper lessons always follow us back afterward. We keep thinking about characters long after the story ends. We wonder what we would have done differently in their place. Epic fantasy lives inside us because it raises uncomfortable questions. Would you protect innocence even when the world feels hopeless? Would you forgive an enemy when revenge feels completely justified? Would you trust someone flawed when stakes become unbelievably high? These stories test our empathy more than we realize initially. They force us to consider the true meaning of courage. Courage isn't loud. Courage is quiet persistence during overwhelming fear. Evil isn't monstrous. Evil is often subtle and shockingly human. Good isn't perfect. Good is wounded, tired, and still determined. These truths shape every legendary tale we love deeply. We keep returning because these themes feel endlessly relatable. The magic draws us in, but the morality keeps us hooked. Epic fantasy paints good as more than shining purity alone. It paints evil as more than simple darkness without depth. These stories show both sides evolving constantly through struggle. The greatest battles always happen inside hearts, not battlefields. When characters fall, we feel their pain inside ourselves. When they rise again, we feel our hope restored instantly. Epic fantasy blends emotion with imagination like nothing else can. Every choice characters make shapes the world around them dramatically. And each story reminds us our choices shape our world too. That's why these tales remain timeless across generations, effortlessly. They teach us goodness requires effort, not effortless perfection. They show darkness always seeks opportunities to grow stronger. Yet light survives when someone decides it must survive today. Epic fantasy asks, who will choose the harder path willingly? Whose moral compass remains steady when everything feels broken? These questions define the emotional power behind these stories. Maybe that's why we crave them during uncertain personal moments. Maybe that's why their lessons comfort us through struggles. Good versus evil becomes a universal language, understood worldwide. Everyone recognizes the courage required to stand for good. Everyone understands temptation pulling characters toward darkness. These themes speak through cultures, backgrounds, and different experiences. Epic fantasy connects hearts using universal truths disguised fantastically. Now let's journey deeper into how these stories actually explore morality. Let's explore why good and evil feel endlessly fascinating inside fantasy. And let's uncover what makes these themes so emotionally unforgettable. Imagine walking through a vast ancient kingdom trembling under growing darkness. Every villager whispers rumors about mysterious shadows spreading quietly. People feel fear, although no one sees the threat directly. This is where epic fantasy often begins its moral journey. Darkness rises slowly, testing every character's courage and loyalty deeply. Good emerges through small choices before growing into heroic arcs. A simple act of kindness sparks an entire epic destiny. A moment of hesitation pushes another character down darker roads. Fantasy thrives by showing how tiny decisions shift massive fates. A hero rarely begins strong, confident, or certain about anything. They start afraid, unsure, and overwhelmed by impossible responsibilities suddenly assigned. Their journey reflects our personal struggles with doubt and uncertainty. Every step forward requires confronting fears they tried avoiding before. Their strength grows through loss, heartbreak, and painful self-realization. Evil challenges them relentlessly, revealing their vulnerabilities and flaws. Yet every failure brings moments of unexpected growth and clarity. Fantasy shows goodness evolving through hardship, not effortless perfection. Heroes make mistakes, learn lessons, and rise stronger afterward. Their humanity becomes their greatest strength in impossible moments. Meanwhile, villains rarely begin entirely monstrous or irredeemable. They often start with fear, insecurity, or painful memories. Their choices twist slowly when darkness offers easy escape. Temptation whispers promises of power, control, and emotional relief. Fantasy reveals how evil feels seductive before it feels destructive. One wrong decision sparks another, shaping darker destinies gradually. They justify each step, believing they're protecting something important. These villains mirror human struggles with pride, fear, and desire. Their journey becomes a warning wrapped inside dramatic storytelling. Epic fantasy blurs lines between good intentions and harmful actions. This complexity makes every storyline richer and more meaningful. The hero's challenge becomes resisting darkness inside themselves. Their victories feel powerful because they overcome internal conflict first. Fantasy worlds create external battles to symbolize internal struggles. Dragons represent fears we avoid confronting in real life. Dark lords embody unchecked ambition, taking control over morality. Magical forces highlight emotional struggles amplified into epic scale. These metaphors help us understand deeper truths creatively and safely. We learn about ourselves through journeys of fictional characters. Every quest symbolizes growth toward becoming stronger, kinder individuals. Goodness becomes a path learned through constant struggle and humility. Evil becomes a trap hidden behind comfort, power, and convenience. Fantasy shows us how people change when stakes rise dramatically. It highlights courage emerging from ordinary individuals facing extraordinary threats. It reminds us bravery isn't absence of fear, but mastery of it. Every triumph feels earned because characters sacrifice something precious. They lose companions, innocence, and illusions while discovering deeper truths. Their emotional wounds shape them into wiser, more compassionate heroes. Epic fantasy uses these transformations to explore human resilience. Stories often reveal goodness, shining brightest after devastating despair. The darkest moments become turning points toward hope and redemption. Characters rebuild themselves through determination and powerful internal change. Readers connect deeply because these growth cycles mirror real life. We also rebuild ourselves after difficult chapters in our lives. Fantasy simply amplifies the emotions and lessons dramatically. It teaches us strength rises from brokenness, not perfect beginnings. As heroes rise, villains descend further into consuming darkness. Their choices reflect consequences they refused to recognize earlier. Fantasy reminds us evil grows through repeated, unchecked decisions. It shows how small corruptions eventually lead to catastrophic outcomes. The contrast between hero and villain deepens emotional tension beautifully. Both sides reveal different responses to fear and weakness. One seeks strength through compassion, while the other seeks dominance. These conflicting paths amplify the moral weight of the story. Epic fantasy thrives on these opposing journeys, shaping entire worlds. Their clash represents a profound struggle inside every human heart. Good versus evil becomes more than a battlefield confrontation. It becomes a philosophical question woven into every chapter. What makes someone choose light despite overwhelming darkness surrounding them? What pushes someone toward darkness despite having better choices available? Fantasy never provides simple answers, but invites deeper reflection. Through its storytelling, we examine our own beliefs and choices. What if good and evil in epic fantasy aren't opposites at all? What if they are intertwined forces shaping each other constantly? Fantasy often reveals this twist when stories reach their climax. Heroes discover darkness inside themselves at crucial breaking points. Villains reveal small sparks of humanity still surviving within them. These moments challenge everything we assumed about morality earlier. Epic fantasy shows good and evil aren't fixed traits permanently. Their choices repeated until they become identity through actions. This twist transforms the story from simple conflict to deeper philosophy. Heroes sometimes rely on former villains to overcome final obstacles. Villains sometimes hesitate, revealing guilt hidden beneath cruelty. These moments blur clarity and highlight complexity beautifully. Fantasy teaches us people are not born entirely good or evil. Circumstances, pain, and choices shape their paths over time. The twist reveals how thin the line between both forces becomes. Heroes risk falling when emotions overpower discipline and clarity. They face temptations challenging their beliefs and moral strength. Fantasy shows goodness requires conscious effort every single day. Darkness requires almost no effort to grow inside someone. This revelation shifts the story from external battles to internal battles. The final confrontation becomes a reflection of inner struggle. Heroes win when they conquer their fears and doubts courageously. Villains lose when they surrender completely to their inner emptiness. Fantasy reveals moral victory isn't about defeating an enemy physically. It's about defeating the darkness threatening your identity. The twist reshapes the meaning of good versus evil entirely. Goodness becomes resilience, empathy, and responsibility deeply embraced. Evil becomes surrender, selfishness, and unchecked emotional wounds. Fantasy uses dramatic battles to expose these symbolic truths. The greatest transformation happens within characters before outside victory occurs. A hero's true triumph lies in choosing integrity despite suffering. A villain's downfall often lies in refusing painful self-reflection. These internal dynamics make fantasy deeply relatable to real life. We also fight shadows no one else sees around us. We also face choices shaping who we become tomorrow. Epic fantasy simply magnifies these decisions into breathtaking storytelling. The twist reveals the real struggle isn't choosing sides initially. It's choosing the right path repeatedly when everything feels difficult. This truth echoes through every epic fantasy masterpiece ever written. The question changes from who will win to who will become stronger. This shift makes endings feel powerful and emotionally unforgettable. Good prevails because someone decides to protect others despite suffering. Evil collapses because selfishness eventually destroys itself completely. These deeper truths remain hidden until the final story moments. Fantasy encourages us to examine our personal inner battles honestly. It inspires us to choose courage over comfort whenever possible. It reminds us goodness grows through consistent daily choices. It shows how evil thrives through avoidance and emotional neglect. This insight transforms epic fantasy into personal moral guidance. Stories become maps, showing paths towards stronger character and compassion. They show victory requiring inner discipline, emotional healing, and wisdom. They show darkness falling when confronted with empathy and truth. These lessons remain long after the story ends completely. They follow us into our relationships, decisions, and opportunities. Epic fantasy becomes a quiet teacher guiding us subtly and powerfully. The twist reveals fantasy isn't escapism, it's emotional exploration. It allows us to face moral questions through symbolic storytelling. It encourages self-growth using characters walking difficult paths bravely. Good versus evil becomes a metaphor for self-improvement. And each story reminds us improvement requires courage and honesty. Heroes rise because they confront their failures instead of hiding. Villains fall because they refuse to accept necessary transformation. Epic fantasy helps us identify these tendencies within ourselves. It asks us which path we're shaping through our actions today. It challenges us to nurture the goodness inside us intentionally. It warns us about small choices leading toward destructive consequences. These themes give epic fantasy long-lasting emotional and psychological impact. Stories reshape our understanding of morality through creativity and symbolism. Good and evil become reflections of personal choices and growth. The twist shows both forces living within every human heart. The true epic battle happens inside us every single day. Fantasy simply gives shape to these inner conflicts visually and emotionally. And through its storytelling, it reveals profound truths about humanity.